Hello, greetings to everyone and welcome to this video lecture on cosmology. Today in our lecture we are dealing with particularly two aspects, space and time. First we look into the space of our world. In physical beings we have both essence and properties. We studied the essence or the whatness in the last lecture, the matter in the mechanistic conception, the matter of the universe, and also a different conception of matter in reference to the quantum world of subatomic particles. Today we try to approach the two properties, space and time. In our study of the universe, what comes first to our mind is to know its whereabouts, that is, the environment of the world. To know the whereabout, we must know the where. The where refers to where bodies are, that is, the space of our world. In understanding the concept of space, there is another property of the material world or of any material object, that is quantity. Understanding what is quantity to our study of the universe really is a pathway to the understanding of space and other properties of our material world. Let us now speak about quantity. That would take us to the concept of space. What is quantity? The very first and simplest property of the world which affects our senses, especially our sight and touch, is quantity. In fact, quantity is the aspect or property of anything that can be measured, weighed, counted, etc. Thus, St. Thomas Aquinas wrote, "The first condition of matter is quantity, because according to it we focus on its division and indivisibility, and therefore on unity and multiplicity. Thus, any other accident is based on substance through quantity, and quantity is former to every accident naturally." And understanding this, if we are trying to define what quantity, there is no definition of quantity, but we can describe it. Through an example, we can say, quantity is that property which allows us to call something either big or small. Also, we could assert that because of quantity, things have parts over parts, or they have parts which are different among themselves, and one of them is not the other. Quantity can be in a twofold way we can understand. Quantity is either continuous quantity or discontinuous quantity through which we can try to understand the world. First, let us see what is continuous quantity. The continuous quantity, the parts are so interrelated that the end of one is the beginning of another. It is simultaneous if the parts exist at the same time. It is successive if one part follows the other without interruption. For instance, we have time or movement, where one movement follows another movement without interruption, or time as one instant after another instant without interruption is a succession. Now, second one is a discontinuous quantity. In this case, the parts of the thing or object can be separated. Therefore, quantity is characterized by interruptions or breaks. Even so, parts are considered like parts of a whole, that is, what happens in the atomic world. There is no confusion here to understand physical reality and quantity. We understand that quantity is like an absolute accident. That is why it is said that quantity has some sort of substantiality because we understand everything by quantity. Whatever we understand is understood on the property of quantity. That's why we say that quantity has some sort of substantiality. From quantity stems the logical property of physical beings, the concept of number. And on quantity, we are able to measure out. Talking of the world in numbers, we are in mathematics through quantity. What is mathematics related to the world through quantity? More specifically, the notion of number has its origin in discontinuous or discrete quantity. Through number, precisely the different parts of a discrete quantity of any object are united. We find several distinctions of number. We can distinguish them as abstract number and concrete number. The abstract number refers to the number as such without any other specification. Thus we say 1, 5, 10, 12. They are number as such. No specification of any other thing. That is abstract number. What is 10? What is 5? What is 1? We have nothing to say in concrete about 1, 5, 10, etc. But there are concrete number. Concrete number designates collective things which are united by number. For example, 5 trees, 7 people, 12 cats, and so on. That they have the number with the specification with other objects, or they have in reference to objects or with objects, they are distinguished. Thus we have concrete number which designates objects. If we turn around, we will discover that number is present all over the universe with reference to objects or anything. Because measuredness is a property of all physical beings, number is present everywhere since it expresses things in their quantity. That is the reason why Pythagoreans believed that number is the essence of everything. According to Euclid, number is the plurality which is made up of units. Isaac Newton goes a little further and says that as number we understand more than a plurality of units, an abstract relationship between one quantity and another quantity of the same sort, which is taken as unit. The mathematical physicist Paul Davies explains the great role that mathematics plays in our understanding of the universe through number, by quantity. According to him, at least in our scientific understanding of the world, we need mathematics. So he writes, to the outsider, the mathematics is a strange, abstract world of horrendous technicality, full of wired symbols and complicated procedures, an impenetrable language and a black art. To the scientist, mathematics is the guarantor of precision and objectivity. It is also astonishingly the language of nature itself. No one who is closed off from mathematics can ever grasp the full significance of the natural order that is woven so deeply into the fabric of physical reality. Because of his indispensable role in science, many scientists, especially physicists, invest the ultimate reality of the world in mathematics. A physicist once remarked that, in his opinion, the world was nothing but bits and pieces of mathematics. To the ordinary person, it may be astounding because whose picture of reality is tied closely to their perception of physical objects and whose view of mathematics is that of an esoteric recreation. Yet the contention that mathematics as the key that enables the initiative to unlock cosmic secrets is a fact, as old as the subject itself, the subject of cosmology itself. Underlining the essential role of quantity and therefore number that play in the understanding of the physical world, we cannot but accept that mathematics is the essence of physical reality. It is based on this we have our understanding of the physical universe through mathematics by number, that is coming from quantity. Now we have got the continuous quantity. How are we to think of the world with continuous quantity? If the world is understood in discontinuous quantity by discrete number in mathematics, how are we to understand the world if it is in a continuous quantity? This brings to our mind the concept of extent. Extent means an area or the range over which something extends. From the philosophical point of view, this is a property of continuous quantity. It may be described like a system of relationships between a physical thing and others which are related with it. It may be described like a system of relationships between a physical thing and others which are related with it. This takes us to two affirmations. Impenetrability is not possible, and it is not possible for a body to be in different places at the same time because everything is one extent. They can be possible for substances not affected by quantity, that is, not affected by a continuous quantity of extent. That is often heard spoken as fact on the spiritual realm of reality. That is how, if we are trying to understand the universe by extent. Now we come to our central concept of our study today is the space. The concept of space the concept of place introduces the theme of space. If we consider space either as the distance between different places or as the container of all the bodies, but excluding these of course, then we have the idea of space. Space as a container without the contained. This one is known like the geometrical and imaginary space. Thus, place describes the surface which receives and circumscribes the content. On the other hand, space appears to our imagination as something that permeates the bodies and fills every place. We cannot identify space and quantity because quantity is subject to changes, while the space appears the same, at least to our senses. For some philosophers, space is a real substance. In this line, it is conceived like a container by Democritus. According to Isaac Newton, it is the nature which remains always the same and immovable. It is like an absolute void, which as such sounds against the common sense. By a different philosophical trend, the philosopher Leibniz considers space as the ideal order of all coexistent physical things. For Immanuel Kant, space is nothing but an a priori knowledge of the senses. Conception of imaginary space as container of all bodies helps us to understand the difference between space and physical things, which is real. We cannot accept that space is just imagination. In fact, any container can be conceived and can exist without contained things, while the real space cannot exist without the presence of the bodies. So the reality of the space as a container cannot be there without the contained the bodies or the matter. Space therefore is not the same as place. We cannot say it is here or there, at your right or left. Space contains every place, but it is not contained by any place. Space then is a kind of relationship. It's a relationship of the dimensions. We may have an idea of space if we consider the universe in its dimensions, and these dimensions in relationship with the things that they contain. In the background of these general understanding, we move to the mechanistic conception of space. In mechanistic cosmology, space is thought to be container of matter. For Newton, matter is full space or occupied space, in contrast to full space or filled space as empty space. So there is a contrast between full space and empty space. A full space is a filled space, that is occupied space. Thus, there is a fundamental distinction between full space, which is matter, and empty space. The notion of independent space lies behind the distinction between material stuff and the space it occupies. Moreover, matter moves in space. It is the separability of empty, immovable container from its movable material content which makes displacement possible. The important properties of space are the following: homogeneity, infinity, and causal passivity. At first place, space is something homogeneous in the mechanistic conception. This means that space has the same nature or quality everywhere. Neither matter nor motion can affect space. All changes in the world result from the motion of matter in space, not from space itself. Secondly, space is infinite. This means that space has no limit. This follows from the homogeneity of space. For if space is truly homogeneous, every part of it must have coexisting parts. Every part of space must have parts side by side. If space is finite and limited, the limiting parts of space or the boundary of space would not have coexisting parts and so would not be homogeneous. Hence, space has no boundary and so it is infinite. Finally, space is causally passive. This too follows from the homogeneity of space. Space is nothing but a passive container of things completely different to all changes. It does not cause any change in the universe. All changes are the results of material bodies and their motions. Now, this is the mechanistic conception of space with its properties and qualities. Now we come to the second notion or important fundamental aspects of the world as it is conceived, the mechanistic conception of physical or cosmology or physics. That is time. Time is the third fundamental concept of classical physics. The basic relation in space is side-by-sidedness. That is, the point of being beside one another, alongside, next to, other side of, etc. In same line with the conception of space, basic relation in time is succession. That is, of the instants of time following one another. Except for this fundamental difference of side-by-sidedness for space and succession for time. Otherwise, the properties of space, time are similar to that of space. The nature and properties of space and time are almost identical in mechanistic cosmology. We have our personal experience of time to understand what time is. But suppose if we want to describe this personal experience of time in its essence as to what it is, then we find it difficult. That's why St. Augustine says about time that if nobody asks me, I know. If somebody asks me, I don't know. To understand the concept of time, we need to understand first what is movement. Because quantity is connected to movement in space and also to time, which is considered like the measuring of the movement. What is movement? Movement is something which can be found in different aspects of life. For example, personal growth is a movement. Group of people with a common ideology, section of a symphony, the appearance of motion in painting, a change in the market price, etc. But the first expression of movement, we find it in the physical world. That is called the physical movement. What is physical movement? It is a transit of a body from one place to another. This may be called the external movement, the physical movement that we experience. There is also an internal movement which has the name of mutation or change or transformation that happens with the things. This can be either quantitative, which means increase or decrease in quantity, or it can be qualitative, which means transformation or change. The qualitative one may be substantial or accidental. It is substantial when the substance is transformed into another completely different one. An example of substantial quality or substantial movement or substantial qualitative change will be food is transformed into blood and flesh. It is accidental when it changes accidentally only. For example, when water becomes solid, it has an accidental mutation. Now, in order to understand movement, it is appropriate to remember that it presupposes the following. That from what we have explained now with regard to movement, two things can be presupposed to understand what movement is. A starting point and a reaching point. Secondly, a permanent individual. That is to say, a permanent individual between a starting state and a reaching state is movement taking place between two opposite terms. It presupposes a permanent individual which moves from one point to another. We can find both terms, that the starting term and a reaching term, and the individual are present even in a substantial change. If we do not have a permanent individual and both terms, we would not have a real transformation, but only a creation or annihilation. Creation or annihilation. In creation and annihilation, we do not have a permanent individual or subject. For example, in creation, we are lacking the starting term. We have only the reaching term. Thus, we see something immediately, but we don't see anything, but we see something all on a sudden. It is creation. That is what we sometimes hear people speaking of, the creation out of nothing. In annihilation, we have just the starting term, we lack the reaching term. Thus, we say sometimes something is destroyed to nothing, destroyed to nothing. We see something and it is not there, it is destroyed and the thing is to nothing. That is annihilation. We have no reaching term. Thus, arriving the starting term and the reaching term and the permanent individual, how do we understand movement? Here it may be convenient to remember the concepts of potency and act, which are related to movement. Potency is the inherent capacity for growth or perfection. Act is the perfection of a being in potency. These are the principles of Aristotle's metaphysics, we know. From that, it comes to a definition of movement in these words. So, applying the principles of act and potency to what we have said, the two elements, it can be defined as, the movement can be defined as the act of a being in potency insofar as in potency. We say the act of a being in potency because it moves only that which is in potency or that which is able to obtain something. And we say insofar as it is in potency because it does not move itself but while it is in potency. Only while it is in potency it moves, otherwise it does not move. When it reaches the act, its movement stops. Let's take, for example, Peter is a student of psychology. He is able to learn it because he is intelligent and ready. Then we can say he is in potency because he has the capacity to attain such perfection, which means the knowledge of psychology. Once he has learned it, he will be in act. Thus, the transit from his capacity to learn to the knowledge of psychology is the movement. This one, therefore, will be the progressive learning of psychology. While he is learning, he is in potency. And in summary, from this we take the summary of the elements of movement, and there are 4 elements. First, in every movement there must be a mobile individual. Secondly, there is a form, either substantial or accidental, which the individual acquires or it loses. Third, movement itself or the trend towards the form. Fourth, the starting term and the reaching term. And with these 4 elements, any kind of movement in any kind of movements we can find these 4 elements. And in any movement, we can distinguish something which moves and something which is moved. The first one is called agent, that which moves, and the second one, that which is moved, is called patient. Agent, therefore, is that which accomplishes an action. The patient is that which receives such an action. In consequence, the act of the agent as agent is action, while the act of the patient as patient is passion. Action may be transitive or immanent. It is transitive, its term is out of the agent, that it goes out of the agent. Now think of the fire that heats the water, that the action goes out of the agent, that it heats the water. Immanent, the action is immanent, that it is the one whose effect remains within the agent. For example, all our personal actions remain within ourselves, our thinking, our feeling, etc. So we find action in both the agent and in patient, but in a different way. When it is in the agent, it is there as a principle, as the beginning. And when it is in the patient, as a term, that means through the action of the agent, it has gone out of the agent and reached at something and becomes a new term. Now, after having analyzed a little bit about the movement, and in the background of our study and understanding of movement, now we look into our own experience of time and try to understand what it is for an explanation. How are we to explain time in our personal experience of it? Our experience of time is an experience of duration, that is, of permanence or persistence in being, one being. Any time when we take as from a particular point to another particular point of time or state, it is together as a duration, a period, we say. It is an experience of duration in such a way that it includes succession. It is clear if we look at our personal experience in being with a succession of different changes in our life, that when we take a duration of our existence, from the moment of the time we are conscious of ourselves as living in this world as a child or as a boy or as a girl, and up to now what we are. We have gone through different changes, but all this remains maybe 15 years or 20 years or 25 years and still going on living up, but till now it remains as one duration. Our experience of time offers different kinds of representations from there. For example, first representation can be that our experience of time from the time of my childhood and my consciousness of myself as a person up to now is my own specific time. Thus, everyone has his own or her own specific time. And thus also we can have a particular experience of time as each one's specific time. The specific time is the time which each of us live. It is a qualitative and heterogeneous state of our awareness. This time may be slow or fast according to our psychological experiences. Now, someone watching this video, this boring video, will feel himself or herself that the time duration is very slow. The time runs slow because the psychological experiences are such a way that he finds boring of this lecture and feels that the time is slow. Or in an interesting movie, watching an interesting movie and it got finished, we say time so gone fast. So, but during the sleeping time almost disappears because our psychological activity is almost nothing, it is zero. On the contrary, when our psychological activity is intense in our daily activities, when the psychological activities are intense, time seems to be running too fast. Now, second way we can represent our experience of time is imaginary time. This one is something constant and void, which we conceive like a line on which the events of the world evolve, as one line in which all events and changes of our life are evolving and becoming. Thus, this is an imaginary time as one line, one single line of succession with events evolving or changes taking place. Now, the third representation of our personal experience of time is objective time. It is the external time to which we refer other kinds of time as a sort of unit. In fact, we use the time that the earth takes to spin around its own axis. That is what we call a day. Now, taking this movement of the earth revolving around its own axis and its duration as a unit, it is a movement by which it is taken as a unit by which we have a day. Even though it is merely conventional, it is regular and everybody accepts it. We can observe that time presupposes movement. This is clearly, especially in objective time. We measure the movement of the earth while spinning in its own axis. Obviously, in that measurement, we distinguish the successive progress of movement, or we distinguish moments that follows other moments. Therefore, time presupposes sequence in movement. This very well falls in line with the definition of time given by Aristotle, that time is the number of movements according to that which comes first or after. Time therefore stems from quantity insofar as it is a number of movements. Through quantity we count the movement insofar as movement is the transit from one point to another. And through movement, quantity enters in time because time is the measurement of the movement and that which unites the potential parts of movements. It is reasonable to say that time is number since it describes the same thing which is counted. And we realize then that time is a continuous and fluent number. And being number, we find that time has different elements. What are the elements of time as number? The first thing is that time is with past, present and future. How are we to understand time with the elements of past, present and future? What really exists is the present. The past is already gone and the future does not exist yet. The whole time, that is with the past, present and future, does not exist as such but exists in the mind, which through memory keeps up the elapsed past and through foresight anticipates the future. Thus, the whole time exists or can exist only in mind. Now, second element of the time is present. Present, however, is like a point that continually flows between past and future. So, present by itself does not have any multiplicity. But when we speak of a specific present, which we call now, that includes certain internal multiplicity and certain succession or sequence of acts. When we internally get into awareness of now, the moment, we have certain multiplicities with our psychological experience. This is the minimum of time which our awareness requires to perceive a sequence of acts like a whole. Now, the third element of time is time as duration. We can experience time or we can take or understand time as duration. The specific duration or a length of time is the same in being insofar as it is the permanence on succession and change. It is something persistent in being. Further, duration makes possible the simultaneous presence of past and future in the present. In fact, the present of a permanent being is the virtual gathering of past and future. Time is considered as real because it is the measurement of movement, and the measurability of movement is an objective reality. But even though movement is measurable in itself, in fact it is measured only in our minds. Thus, the measurement of movement does not exist in act except in our mind measures it. Therefore, we say that time does not exist in act but in the mind. Now we come to the mechanistic conception of time. Having understood the reality of time as measurement in movement, in the act of measuring in mind, let us now look into the mechanistic conception of time. Just as we have seen that the basic relation in space in the mechanistic conception is side-by-sidedness, the basic relation in time is succession, that the instants of time follow one another. According to Isaac Newton, time flows whether something changes or not in itself. Time is empty and is filled by concrete changes. Changes are in time, they are not time itself. This distinction between time and concrete becoming is at the very foundation of classical physics. As we have seen that space does not imply matter, also time does not imply motion or change. Just as matter fills or occupies portions of space, So motion or changes fill or occupy portions of time. Just as space is a container of matter, so time is a container of all changes. Now, the important properties of time are the following: homogeneity, infinity, and causal passivity. At first, let us see what is homogeneity. Time is homogeneous. This means that time has the same nature or quality always and everywhere. Though changes take place in time, the duration of time underlying these changes is indifferent to them. Now, secondly, time is infinite. This follows from the homogeneity of time. The infinity of time implies the absence of any initial moment in the past or of any final moment in the future. For such moments would possess a special character which would be incompatible with the homogeneity of time. If time is truly homogeneous, that every instant must have its predecessor and successor, consequently, there cannot be a first moment which had no predecessor, nor a last moment which will lack a successor. Finally, time is causally passive. This means that time does not cause any physical change in the universe. All changes are the results of material bodies and their motions. No physical changes can be produced by the mere flow of time. Changes in the material world result from the motion of bodies in time. They do not originate from time itself. Thus, we have the mechanistic conception of time in the background of what the specific experience of our time from the perspective of movement. And tomorrow we will in our lecture see what is motion and theory of relativity, and by which we will have a different view of the world. Now, thank you very much.